What if we wanted to add new users and roles for our Pimcore administration? We would need to go here to settings, users and roles. And let's say we wanted to add a new role. Roles and users in general are used to give certain users or a group of users certain permissions for accessing certain functionalities, seeing something within the administration, basically limiting what the actual user can do. A use case here would be, for example, if you have some kind of product manager, they will only be able to edit the product objects. They wouldn't necessarily be able to see the orders that were made, or basically you can control what kind of objects a certain user can see, publish, delete, edit, and etc. In this case, we're going to use my test object here, and we're going to limit a user to only be able to see and potentially edit this. So to add a new role, click on the folder here, right click it, and add a role. And let's call it test manager. If we click on the newly created role, we can see that we have an option of perspective, which a certain or particular user with this role can see. Perspectives are available here. And basically what a perspective is what the user can see. You can change the layout of how everything is shown here within the administration. And I'm going to show you an example of that by creating our custom one. So I'm not going to be opening all of these for you to see. Right now, we're just going to click on the default perspective. Here under permissions, this is what actually controls mostly the options here on the sidebar. Since we are going to give this user the permission to edit our test objects, we need to check this object's checkbox. There are way too many permissions on what you can do. They're pretty self-explanatory when you look at them. So we're not gonna go through all of them. It's basically what I said. When you go here to the side menu, you'll find the corresponding permission here. These are some of the predefined documents that were made with the demo. I'm not going to check any of these. If you don't check any of them, it defaults to all, as it says here, it defaults to you basically checking all of them. Down here we have the classes, and as I said, we want to give this user the permission to see and potentially edit this class. So I'm going to control and click on this class so that we can use it and show it to the user. Also down here you can give the user permission to edit particular languages. So if, for example, you have an object which has localized fields, English, German, and French, you can limit the languages which a particular user can see and or edit. So for example, he can see and edit in English, but he can only see the German and French translations. No view permissions means all. Okay. And another thing that we want to add, these are called workspaces. So you can control what kind of documents, assets, and data objects a particular user can edit. Since we are talking about data objects, we're going to add a new row here. We want this user to only be able to see and work with objects within the test objects folder. We'll give him a permission to list, view, save, publish. We're not gonna give him the permission to unpublish, delete, rename. We can give him the permission to create. Not gonna give him the permission to go to settings, versions. Well, we're gonna give him versions, and that's basically it. Click on save. So this role is basically only going to be covering the test objects. Now let's add a user and give him this role. So right click on the folder all users, add a user, call him Ivan. If we click on this user, we can see that we have a bunch of things that we can add. One thing that we need to do is generate a password. So I'm just going to copy this. First name, last name, email. This is not important. We're going to control click and add this role to him. Here you can see that you have the option. Also, we don't need to put the perspective since we already put the perspective here. One thing that I should note, if you add a particular role to a user and then after that add some additional rules or permissions to the user, it will override what's within the role. So if I put in here within the role that users with the test manager role can't unpublish, delete, rename, and go to settings and properties, if I go to this user and I add the same rule for the test objects folder, but I check all of them, then that rule will be used. So the rule that's directly on the user will override the rule that is located here in the roles. So let's go back to settings so we can see if we need to add anything else. Here you can pick the default language for the user. The user can always go here to my profile and change it if need be. Basically here you have the same permissions that you have within the roles, so there is nothing else that we really need to change. Let's go back up, and yeah, we already copied this. Click on save, and now you can, let's say, open up a incognito tab, go to the address, type in /admin. Now if we type in Ivan and paste the password, we can now log in to this user, and as you can see, he has the permission to view this particular folder and the objects. If we click on one of the objects, we can see that he does not have the option to delete. Go to properties and basically everything that we within the workspace for the data object. So let me show you an example with the override. So as I said, if directly on the user, I would put in the same rule, but with permissions to do everything from this list, and I click on save. If I go back to our other page, let me just find it. There we go. And we refresh the site. We'll now see that on this particular object, the user now has the permissions to do everything. Now let's go back. Let's delete this. Another thing to note, that if I had created multiple roles, users can have multiple roles, and when you combine all of the rules, well, workspace rules that you put on them, they would basically have everything from the list. A use case here would be if you had, let's say, a test manager and a product manager, and you put in both roles on the same user. That user will now be able to, for example, edit and change products based on the rules that you put on the other role as well. Now, another cool thing that we can add is, let's say when we go here on the user, it says data objects, and it's maybe pretty confusing for, let's say, someone that's not within the IT sector. Now, to add new perspectives and custom views, you would need to go here to the config folder within your project, go to Pimcore, and here you can see that you have the perspectives and custom views PHP files. I believe that within the skeleton version, either the custom views or the perspectives.example PHP files will be only created as an example. So in that case, you would need to copy either the custom views .example.php and create a custom views.php, or the perspectives.example.php and create a perspectives.php file. So let's open it up. Here you can see that actually we already have a couple of examples made here. The first thing that we're going to do is let's just see what the IDs are. As I see, the highest ID currently is the ID of 8. So let me just copy one of these examples like that. Go to the bottom. And since the highest ID currently is 8, we're going to put the ID of 9 here. This is going to be the name of the tab right here. So let's call it test objects. The tree type is going to be object, since we are going to be fetching objects. This is the icon that's going to be located here next to the name of the tab. Right now we're not going to be changing that, but you can go here to settings and go to the icon library and pick whichever icon you wish. The root folder for our objects is going to be /test objects, since within the data objects all of our test objects are located here. Here you can define which classes are going to be visible. In our case it's only the test class, but if, for example, within this folder you also had car classes, you can define it with a comma separated value. The sort is going to be the order in which the tabs are going to be shown. Right now, for this particular perspective, we're only going to have just one tab, so we're going to put in the sort of 1. You can also show the root folder. This means that if someone would open our custom tab, you would also show the name of the folder in which the objects are. In our case, we're just going to leave it as false. You can do additional querying. So if, for example, I had a attribute on this test object, let's say the attribute says if the test object is new or old, we can do an additional query here for that attribute and only show the objects that you actually need shown within that folder. So it's basically another way of additionally querying data. And here you can pick if the tab should be already expanded when the page has loaded, or it should remain collapsed. So let's save that. Now if we go to perspectives, here we have a couple of examples of perspectives already made. We can just copy this CMS perspective. Let me just see where this ends. So it ends there. So we should add a new comma here and add our new perspective. Call it test objects perspective. Here we can add an icon that will be shown for this perspective. This perspective will be shown here on the top tab, and basically the icon and the name are used from these two attributes. The elementary are basically the list of tabs or custom views or whatever you want to show. If you type in the documents, you would get this documents tab. If you added assets like so, you would have this assets tab like here, and objects, you would get this data objects tab. But in our case, we added a custom view. So we're going to delete that. The type is of custom view. The name we do not need. The hidden we do not need, since we already defined this within our custom view. The only thing that we need to define here is the ID of our custom view, which is 9. And now you added the custom view and the perspective. If we go back to our administration and refresh it, we would see that within the list of perspectives, we now have the test objects perspective. If we click on it, it will show us a new tab within a new layout, or should I say perspective, where we have only our test objects listed. Let's go back to our default perspective. And now what we can do, if we go to our users and let's go on roles. If we click on this role, now we'll see that within the perspectives options, we have the test objects perspective. If we select it and save it, one thing that we will notice is if we go back to our user and refresh the site, we'll now see that that particular user with that role now has our tab, which we created. And the reason for that being is, well, because we added it here. If, for example, a particular user would have the access to have multiple perspectives, we can go to that particular user and we can set multiple views. He will have this option to change the perspective which he wants. Along with managing user permissions with roles, there is an additional way in which we can control what the user sees when he's editing a particular object. Now, if we go here to classes, settings, data objects, and classes, and when we click on a particular class, we can see that we have an option to configure custom layouts. Now, custom layouts is a way where you can either reorder the data, the inputs for a particular role, and you can also control what inputs or maybe a whole layout which a user can see. Now let's go and configure a custom layout. You can add a new layout by clicking on add layout, give it a name. Let's call it test layout, or let's call it test manager layout, and paste it here. Okay. And let's configure this layout. Let's drop in all of it. Well, let's delete this option, this whole tab for the field collections, and we can click on one of the fields, and now you can see that by default this is a mandatory field. However, for this, maybe you wouldn't like to show the checkbox to this user, or you don't want them to be able to edit this checkbox. In that case, we can click on this to be non-editable and click on save. Now you have created this custom layout. To control which user will be seeing this layout, you can do so by going to roles, workspaces, and here in the special settings, you can click on custom layouts and click on test manager layout. Click apply and save. Now, if we go back to our user and refresh this, now you can see that we have the field collections tab still here. Now that tab is gone, and also the checkbox is not editable for this particular role and this user. And that's the only layout that he is able to see. However, if I were to go back and go back to custom layouts, click on test as well, which is basically the default layout, click on save. Or if I were to uncheck both of this, you would basically get the same result, which is going to be, let me just show you, refresh the site again, go here, and now you can see that we have the test manager layout, which has the missing tab and the checkbox disabled. But if we go to the master layout, we can see that we have the field collections again. Hope the video helped you. And if you want to learn more about Pimcore, you can check out my Udemy course called Learning Pimcore from Zero to Hero, where I will show you all of the steps from creating a project, buying and setting up a server, as well as deploying your project. Hope to see you there.